Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and whistled low. The Galactic Academy's space station was huge, really huge. He could see ships from dozens of different worlds docked at various ports, and creatures he had never seen before walking around like it was no big deal. "This place is incredible," Lisa Parker said, adjusting her backpack. She was a park ranger from Colorado, used to wide-open spaces, but even she was impressed by the size of this floating city in space. Tony Richards nodded, but stayed quiet. The former Marine had seen a lot of strange places, but nothing quite like this. "Our docking bay is supposed to be Section 12, he said, checking the datapad they had been given. The three humans made their way through the crowded corridors. Other beings moved around them, but Jake noticed they kept getting strange looks. Some aliens whispered to each other when they passed. A few even pointed. "Are we famous or something?" Jake asked with a grin. "Maybe they have never seen humans before," Lisa suggested. They found their classroom after asking directions 3 times. The aliens they asked had all looked surprised when they mentioned Extreme Survival Classroom 101. One of them, a tall, blue creature with 4 arms, had actually backed away from them. "Good luck," the blue alien had said, but it sounded more like, "I am sorry for your loss." The classroom was large and filled with the strangest collection of beings Jake had ever seen. There were creatures made of what looked like living crystal, others that seemed to be made of gas, floating in clear suits, and some that looked like giant insects walking on their back legs. At the front of the room stood their instructor. Professor Zin Thara looked like a giant octopus that had learned to stand upright. She had 6 arms, each one moving independently, and her skin changed colors as she spoke. "Welcome, students, to what many consider the most challenging course in the known galaxy," she began. Her voice came through a translator device, but even through the machine, Jake could hear something that sounded like worry. "Extreme Survival Classroom 101 has a dropout rate of 90%. Many who attempt this course do not complete it." Jake looked around at his fellow students. They all looked serious, some even scared. A few of the crystal beings were actually glowing brighter, which he guessed meant they were nervous. "Hey," he whispered to Lisa and Tony, "this sounds like fun." Professor Zinthara continued her speech. "Over the next several weeks, you will face 5 separate survival challenges. Each one has been designed to push you to your absolute limits. You will face extreme temperatures, dangerous wildlife, hostile environments, and situations where a single mistake could mean death." One of the gas creatures made a sound like a deflating balloon. Jake thought it might be crying. "The first challenge," the professor said, her tentacles moving in what looked like excitement, "will take place on a world where the conditions are barely suitable for life. Temperatures will reach 40 degrees Celsius. Humidity levels will be at 85%. The atmosphere is thick and oppressive." Jake blinked. 40 degrees Celsius. He did the math in his head. That was about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. "So like Houston in summer?" he said to Tony. Tony nodded. "Or Iraq on a cool day?" "The local wildlife," Professor Zenthara went on, "includes several species of venomous creatures, large predators, and insects that carry dangerous diseases." "Sounds like camping in Florida," Lisa whispered around them. The other students were already pulling out equipment. The crystal beings had devices that looked like personal air conditioners. The insect creatures were putting on what appeared to be extra protective shells. The gas beings were checking their environmental suits twice. "You will have minimal supplies," the professor continued. "Basic tools, water purification tablets, emergency food rations for 3 days, and a communication device for true emergencies only." "Wait," said one of the crystal beings, its voice high and scared. "Only 3 days of food? What if we cannot find more?" "That," said Professor Zenthara, "is the point of the exercise. Jake was starting to feel excited. This sounded like the camping trips his grandfather used to take him on when he was a kid. Hot, humid, lots of bugs, and you had to find your own food after the first few days. "When do we start?" he asked. Every head in the room turned to look at him. The professor's skin went through several color changes. "You seem eager, Mr. Morrison," she said, checking her class roster. "I hope you maintain that enthusiasm." "Oh, I will," Jake said with a smile. "This sounds awesome." Lisa was already thinking about the challenge. Hot and humid meant lots of plant life. Lots of plant life meant food sources, water sources, and materials for building shelter. Venomous creatures meant you had to be careful, but most animals avoided humans if you gave them space. Tony was running through his mental checklist. Hot weather survival was basic stuff. Stay hydrated. Find shade during the hottest parts of the day. Move during cooler hours. The humidity would actually help with water collection if you knew what you were doing. Professor Zinthara was watching the three humans with growing confusion. While every other student in the class looked terrified, these three looked like she had just told them they were going to an amusement park. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "you do not understand the severity of these conditions." "Oh, we understand," Tony said. "It sounds challenging." "Challenging?" squeaked one of the insect beings. "The humidity alone will make it hard to breathe. The heat will drain our energy in hours. The predators will hunt us constantly." Jake looked confused. "But that is just summer, right? I mean, back home in Detroit, we get days that hot all the time. You just drink more water and stay in the shade when you can. And the humidity helps with water collection," Lisa added. "You can get drinking water from the air if you know how to set up a basic condensation trap." "As for the predators," Tony said, "most animals do not want to fight unless they have to. If you know how to move quietly and respect their territory, they usually leave you alone." The classroom fell silent. Professor Zinthara's tentacles had stopped moving entirely, which Jake was beginning to realize meant she was very surprised. "You speak," she said carefully, "as if these are normal conditions." "Well," Jake said, scratching his head, "I guess they kind of are. I mean, Earth gets pretty hot and humid in a lot of places, and we have plenty of dangerous animals." "Dangerous animals?" one of the crystal beings asked. "Sure," Lisa said. "Bears, mountain lions, wolves, venomous snakes, spiders, alligators, sharks. You just have to know how to deal with them." The gas creature made that deflating sound again. Professor Zinthara made a note on her datapad. She was beginning to think she should have read the files on human homeworld conditions before accepting them into her class. "Well then," she said, her voice uncertain for the first time since the class had started, "we will begin tomorrow. Transport leaves at 0800 hours. I suggest you all get a good night's rest." As the students filed out of the classroom, Jake heard fragments of conversation around them. 40 degrees, and they act like it is nothing. Did you hear them talk about predators like they were pets? I heard humans come from a dangerous world, but I thought that was just rumors. Jake grinned at his friends. I think we are going to do just fine in this class. Lisa smiled back. I think you are right. Tony just nodded, but he was smiling. 2. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Behind them, Professor Zenthara was pulling up information about Earth on her computer. What she found there made her tentacles go pale with shock. The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of the water world. Through the small windows, Jake could see nothing but ocean stretching to the horizon. Massive waves rolled across the surface, and he whistled appreciatively. Look at those swells, he said to Tony and Lisa. Must be at least 12 feet. Professor Zenthara was addressing the class over the ship's communication system. Her voice carried that same worried tone from yesterday. Students, you are about to face Challenge 2 of your survival course. Below you is Aquatica Prime, a world covered entirely by ocean. The alien students pressed against the windows, and Jake could hear nervous chittering from the insect beings. One of the crystal creatures was glowing so brightly it hurt to look at directly. The waves you see reach heights of 4 meters, the professor continued. The water contains numerous predatory species, some reaching lengths of 20 meters or more. Most importantly, you are surrounded by salt water that you cannot drink. Salt water, repeated one of the gas beings through its suit's speaker. How do we find fresh water when there is no land? That, said the professor, is your challenge. You must survive for 1 full week in this environment. You have basic flotation devices, emergency rations for 2 days, and the clothes you are wearing. Jake looked down at his simple t-shirt and jeans. Around him, the other students were already putting on complex underwater breathing gear and inflatable survival suits that looked like they cost more than his truck back home. Hey, Lisa, Jake said quietly, you ever been surfing? A few times in California, she replied. These waves look perfect for it. Tony was studying the ocean below with a tactical eye. Currents running northwest to southeast. Winds coming from the west. Waves are consistent, which means steady weather. The ship's cargo bay opened, and a platform lowered them toward the water. The alien students huddled together as spray from the waves hit them. The crystal beings were now wearing what looked like plastic rain covers. Jake breathed in deeply. As they got closer to the water, smell that salt air. Nothing like it. They touched down on the ocean surface, and the platform immediately started bobbing with the waves. Most of the alien students looked sick. Several were making distressed noises. Remember, Professor Zenthara's voice crackled through their communicators. You have 1 week. Find water, find food, survive. Good luck. The platform detached from the ship and left them floating in the middle of the endless ocean. Immediately, the other students began activating their equipment. The insect beings deployed complicated flotation devices that looked like small boats. The crystal creatures set up what appeared to be solar-powered water purification systems. The gas beings inflated emergency shelters. Jake, Lisa, and Tony looked around at the debris left from the platform deployment. There were pieces of metal, some plastic sheeting, and various bits of rope and wire. This'll work, Lisa said, gathering up some of the plastic. We can make a solar still with this. What's a solar still? Asked one of the crystal beings, floating nearby in its high-tech life pod. You use the sun to evaporate salt water, then collect the fresh water when it condenses, Lisa explained, already starting to arrange the plastic sheeting. Basic survival technique. Jake had waded into the water and was looking down into the depths. Hey guys, check this out. There's something big down there. The alien students immediately began backing away from Jake's position. Predator, one of them shouted. Get away from the water. But Jake was grinning. I don't think it's hunting. Look at how it's moving. Through the clear water, they could see a massive shape approaching. It was easily 20 meters long, just as the professor had warned. But instead of attacking, the creature surfaced gently. Near Jake, floating peacefully, it looked like a whale, but with longer fins and bioluminescent patches along its sides that pulsed with soft blue light. Its eyes were large and intelligent, and it seemed curious about these strange visitors to its ocean. Hey there, big guy, Jake said softly, reaching out to touch the creature's fin. You're just checking us out, aren't you? The whale thing made a low musical sound and allowed Jake to pet it. The bioluminescent patches brightened, almost like it was happy. Impossible, breathed one of the insect beings. The briefing said these creatures were apex predators. They probably are, Tony said, swimming over to join Jake. But that doesn't mean they're aggressive. toward everything they meet. Most predators only hunt when they're hungry or threatened. Lisa had finished setting up the solar still and was now studying the waves. The way these swells are moving, there's probably a current underneath that brings up nutrients. That means fish. She was right. Within an hour, they could see schools of smaller fish swimming near the surface. The whale creature seemed to be following these schools, occasionally opening its massive mouth to feed. It's a filter feeder, Lisa realized. Like a baleen whale back home. It eats the small stuff, not the big stuff. Jake was now floating comfortably next to the giant creature, using it as a living island to rest on. The whale didn't seem to mind. In fact, it appeared to enjoy the company. The alien students watched in amazement as more of the deadly predators appeared. There were smaller whale-like creatures, some dolphin-type animals, and various species of colorful fish. None of them showed any aggression toward the humans. "How are you doing that?" One of the crystal beings called out from its sealed survival pod. "Doing what?" Jake called back. "The predators. They should be attacking you." Tony swam over to where a group of the dolphin creatures were playing in the waves. "They're not really predators in the sense you mean. They're just animals trying to live their lives. If you don't threaten them, they usually won't threaten you." One of the dolphin things swam up to Tony and made a clicking sound. Tony clicked back, trying to mimic the sound. The creature seemed delighted and began swimming in circles around him. "It's like they want to play," Tony said, laughing as the creature splashed him. Lisa had discovered that the kelp-like plants growing in underwater forests were not only edible, but actually quite nutritious. "These taste like seaweed back home, but with a slightly sweet flavor." By the end of the first day, the humans had established a comfortable routine. They had fresh water from Lisa's solar still, food from the ocean plants, and fish that Jake had learned to catch by watching the local wildlife, and shelter on the back of their new whale friend, who seemed perfectly happy to serve as a living boat. The alien students were struggling. Their high-tech equipment kept malfunctioning in the salt spray. Their emergency rations were running low. Several of them were seasick from the constant motion of the waves. "Excuse me," one of the insect beings called out to Lisa. "Could you show me how to make one of those water collectors?" "Sure," Lisa said, swimming over with some spare plastic. "It's really simple once you know how." Soon, several of the alien students were clustered around the humans, learning basic ocean survival techniques. Lisa taught them about water collection and plant identification. Tony showed them how to read the movements of waves and currents. Jake demonstrated how to approach the local wildlife without frightening them. "But how did you know these creatures were safe?" asked one of the crystal beings. "We didn't, not for sure," Jake admitted. "But back home, we have a saying. Most animals are more afraid of you than you are of them. The trick is to move slowly, stay calm, and let them get used to you." "Also," added Tony, "predators usually have specific hunting behaviors. This big guy here?" He patted the whale's fin. "He opens his mouth really wide and swims slowly through schools of small fish. That's not how something hunts large prey." "And look at his eyes," Lisa added. "They're set on the sides of his head, which usually means prey animal, not predator. Real hunters usually have forward-facing eyes." Professor Xanthara's voice crackled through their communicators. "Daily check-in, students. How is everyone surviving?" The alien students reported various problems: equipment failures, food shortages, difficulty with the environment. When she got to the humans, her voice carried that familiar note of confusion. "Mr. Morrison, Ms. Parker, Mr. Richards, how are you managing?" "Great," Jake called out cheerfully. "We're having a beach party. Well, ocean party. You should come down and join us." Through the communicator, they could hear Professor Xanthara's tentacles tapping against something. "A party? The local wildlife is really friendly once you get to know them, Lisa explained. And the fishing is excellent. Also, Tony added, some of the other students are having equipment problems. We've been sharing our fresh water and showing them some basic techniques. There was a long pause. Then Professor Zenthar's voice, very quietly, I see. Carry on. That evening, as the sun set over the endless ocean, Jake floated on his back next to the whale, watching the stars come out. Around them, several alien students had joined their impromptu survival group, learning human techniques for ocean living. You know what? Jake said to his friends. I could get used to this. The whale made its musical sound again, and Jake could swear was agreeing with him. The third world looked like Mars, but worse. Red dust stretched in every direction under a pale orange sky. Rocky hills rose from the barren landscape, and Jake could see nothing that looked like it might be alive. Challenge 3, Professor. Zenthara announced through their communicators as the transport ship prepared to leave them on the surface. Survival on Desolation Prime. This world has minimal water sources, extremely limited food resources, and what plant and animal life exists is either toxic to most species or too dangerous to approach. The alien students were already pulling out portable laboratories and scanning equipment. The crystal beings had devices that looked like they could analyze anything down to the molecular level. The insect creatures carried what appeared to be entire chemistry sets. You will have basic tools, 1 day's worth of water, and no food, the professor continued. You must find everything you need to survive for 10 days in this wasteland. Jake looked around at the dusty landscape and grinned. Looks like Arizona in the summer. Or Afghanistan, Tony added, kicking at the red dirt. Same kind of terrain. Lisa was already walking around, examining the ground and the scattered rocks. Actually, this isn't too bad. See those marks in the dirt? Water flows through here. Sometimes, and look at those hills. I bet there are caves up there. The transport ship lifted off, leading them in clouds of red dust. As it settled, Jake could see their fellow students setting up complicated equipment to test everything before. They touched it. One of the crystal beings was running some kind of scan on a small, thorny plant. Inconclusive, it announced. This vegetation could be toxic. I need more time to analyze it. Here, Lisa said, walking over to the same type of plant. She broke off a small piece and rubbed it between her fingers, then smelled it. It's like sagebrush. Probably not good eating, but it won't kill you to touch it. How can you possibly know that? Squeaked one of the insect beings. Experience, Lisa said. Plants that are really dangerous usually have bright colors or strong smells to warn you away. This one just smells like dust and dry leaves. Tony had wandered off toward the hills and was now calling back to them. Hey, found something interesting. Up here. They climbed up the rocky slope to where Tony was crouched, next to what looked like a small cave entrance. Strange scratching sounds were coming from inside. There's something living in there, he said quietly. The alien students immediately backed away. Predator, one of them hissed. The briefing said the local wildlife was extremely dangerous. But Jake was already kneeling next to the cave entrance, listening carefully. Doesn't sound like hunting noises, he said. Sounds more like ... digging? A small creature emerged from the cave, about the size of a house cat, but covered in thick, scaly hide. It had large eyes and sharp claws, and when it saw the group of aliens, it made a sound like an angry hiss. All the alien students scrambled further away. Venomous, one of them shouted. Look at those claws. But Jake stayed perfectly still, making soft clicking sounds with his tongue. The creature tilted its head, curious. Jake slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky from his emergency rations. Easy there, little guy, he said softly, tossing the jerky toward the creature. Just want to be friends. The scaly creature sniffed the jerky, then ate it quickly. It looked at Jake with what might have been hope, and made a softer sound. I think it's hungry, Jake said. And scared. Look how thin it is. Lisa had found more of the creatures emerging from caves all along the hillside. They're not predators, she realized. They're scavengers, like desert animals back home. They survive by finding whatever food and water they can. Tony was examining the caves the creatures had been digging. This is smart. They're following underground water sources. Look, you can see where the rock is damp. Within an hour, Jake had befriended several of the scaly creatures. They followed him around like puppies, and he had started calling the first. One digger because of how it used its claws to scratch at the ground. Unbelievable, muttered one of the crystal beings. First the marine predators, now the desert carnivores. They're not really carnivores, Lisa said, watching as Digger and his friends ate some of the edible roots she had found. Look at their teeth. They're omnivores, like us. They eat whatever they can find. The alien students were still running tests on everything, but they were starting to look worried. Their equipment kept giving conflicting readings, and they hadn't found anything they were confident was safe to eat. Meanwhile, the humans had already set up a comfortable camp. Tony had found a spot where underground water came close to the surface and had dug a small well. Lisa had identified several types of edible plants and even found some grubs under rocks that, while not appetizing, were definitely nutritious. Jake had discovered that Digger and his pack were excellent at finding hidden food sources. The creatures would scratch at seemingly empty ground and uncover caches of seeds and tubers that other animals had buried. It's like having metal detectors, but for food, Jake explained to the amazed alien students. By the third day, the humans had established what could only be described as a small farm. Lisa had figured out how to cultivate some of the local plants in areas where Tony's water collection system could keep them irrigated. Jake's pack of desert creatures brought them new food sources every day. How is this possible? One of the insect beings asked, watching Jake share his lunch with 3 of the scaly creatures who are now following him everywhere. They're just trying to survive, same as us, Jake said. Back home, we call it mutual benefit. I share my food. With them, they show me where to find more food. Everyone wins. The alien students were struggling. Several had already used their emergency communicators to call for additional supplies. Their testing equipment was giving them contradictory information, and they were afraid to eat anything without spending hours analyzing it first. Excuse me, one of the crystal beings said to Lisa, your plant identification methods. Could you teach us? Lisa looked up from where she was showing Tony how to prepare some root vegetables they had found. Sure, it's pretty basic stuff. Soon, Lisa was running an impromptu botany class. She taught them how to identify edible plants by their raw characteristics, how to test small amounts safely, and how to prepare foods to make them more digestible. The key is to start small, she explained. Try a tiny bit first, wait a few hours, see how you feel. If you're okay, try a little more. But what if it's poisonous? Asked one of the gas beings. Most plants aren't trying to kill you, Lisa said. They just want to be left alone. The ones that are really dangerous usually make it obvious with bright colors or terrible smells. Tony was teaching a group how to find and purify water. Water always goes downhill, he explained, showing them how to read the landscape. Even in a desert, there's usually water somewhere. You just have to know where to look. Jake's animal training class was the most popular. The trick is to let them come to you, he said as Digger demonstrated by bringing him a previously unknown type of edible berry. Don't chase them. Don't make sudden movements. Just be patient and show them you're not a threat. Professor Zenthara's daily check-ins were becoming increasingly confused. Status report. Her voice crackled through the communicators on day 5. The alien students reported their various difficulties. Equipment malfunctions, food shortages, water purification problems. And the humans? She asked, though she sounded like she was afraid of the answer. We're doing great, Jake replied cheerfully. We've got a sustainable water source, plenty of food, and Digger here just found what I think might be fruit growing in a hidden valley. Digger? One of the local wildlife. Really smart little guy. He and his pack have been showing us all the best places to find food and water. Through the communicator, they could hear Professor Zenthara's tentacles drumming against her desk. The local wildlife is helping you? Well, we're helping each other, Lisa chimed in. Classic symbiotic relationship. We share our food. They share their knowledge of the local area. Also, Tony added, we've been teaching some of the other students basic survival techniques. Several of them have been having equipment problems. There was a very long pause. Carrie. On, Professor Zenthara said finally, but her voice sounded strained. That evening, as they sat around a small fire they had built from dried plant material, Jake looked out at their little community. Several alien students had joined their camp and were learning human survival techniques. Digger and his pack were curled up, nearby, full in content after a successful day of foraging. You know what I'm starting to think? Jake said to his friends. What's that? Lisa asked, roasting some of the tubers they had found. I think this professor lady doesn't really understand what survival means. Tony nodded, scratching behind Digger's ear flaps. Back home, survival isn't about having the best equipment. It's about adapting to whatever situation you're in. And making friends, Jake added as Digger made a happy purring sound. Everything's easier when you're not doing it alone. Lisa looked around at their thriving little camp and smiled. I wonder what she's going to throw at us next. Jake grinned back. Whatever it is, I bet it won't be as bad as she thinks it is. Digger chittered in what sounded like agreement, and Jake tossed him another piece of roasted tuber. The transport ship shook violently as it fought through the thin atmosphere of the mountain world. Through the windows, Jake could see jagged peaks covered in snow and ice stretching as far as the eye could see. Challenge 4, Professor Zenthara announced, and her voice sounded more worried than ever. High-altitude survival on Frozen Peak. The atmosphere contains only 60% of standard oxygen levels. Temperatures drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius at night. Avalanches are common. Jake looked out at the snow-covered mountains and felt a familiar excitement. Hey, Tony, this looks just like those peaks near Anchorage. Tony nodded, studying the terrain with professional interest. Better, actually. These slopes look more stable, and minus 30 isn't that bad if you know how to stay warm. Lisa was already thinking about shelter and heat sources. The tree line looks pretty high. That means we'll have materials to work with. Around them, the alien students were preparing for what they clearly considered to be certain death. The crystal beings had put on thick insulation suits that made them look like walking refrigerators. The insect creatures were wearing so many layers they could barely move. The gas beings had upgraded to heavy-duty environmental suits. The local wildlife includes ice bears, snow stalkers, and frost wolves, Professor Zenthara continued. All of them are adapted to hunt in these conditions and see warm-blooded creatures as easy prey. Ice bears? Jake perked up. Like polar bears? The air is too thin for most species to function normally, the professor went on. Physical activity will be extremely difficult. Hypothermia and altitude sickness are major concerns. The ship touched down on a relatively flat area between two peaks. As soon as the doors opened, a blast of cold, thin air hit them. The alien students immediately began gasping and shivering. Jake stepped out and took a deep breath. Wow, this air is crisp. Nothing like mountain air to wake you up. Tony was already examining the snow conditions. Good powder, stable base. Weather looks clear for the next few days. Lisa had found some hardy evergreen trees near their landing site and was examining their needles. These are perfect. We can make tea from these needles. Vitamin C and other nutrients. The alien students were struggling just to breathe. Several were already using supplemental oxygen from their emergency supplies. How are you not collapsing? Wheezed one of the crystal beings. Collapsing from what? Jake asked, genuinely. Confused. The altitude, the thin air, the freezing temperature. Jake looked around. It was cold, sure, but nothing worse than a winter day in Alaska. This is like, what, maybe 8,000 or 9,000 feet. That's not too bad. Tony was building a windbreak out of snow blocks. The trick with altitude is to take it easy the first day. Let your body adjust. Don't try to do too much too fast. Lisa had already started a small fire using some dry branches and pine needles. And staying warm is just about layering and keeping dry. Basic cold weather survival. That's when they heard it. A low growling sound from somewhere up the mountain. The alien students immediately clustered together in terror. Ice bear. One of them whispered. Jake looked up the slope and saw a massive white shape moving through the trees. It was indeed bear-like, but bigger than any bear he had ever seen. Easily twice the size of the largest grizzly, with thick white fur and intelligent blue eyes. Everyone stay calm, Tony said quietly. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. But Jake was already walking toward the creature. Hey there, big guy, he called softly. You just checking us out? Jake, no, Lisa hissed. Get back here. The ice bear stopped and looked at Jake curiously. It was massive, with claws the size of knives and teeth that could easily crush bone. But instead of attacking, it sat down in the snow and tilted its head. Studying the strange small creature that wasn't running away, Jake moved slowly, keeping his hands visible. You're not hunting right now, are you? Just curious about the new neighbors. The bear made a soft chuffing sound and sniffed in Jake's direction. After a moment, it stood up and walked closer, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Impossible, breathed one of the insect beings. The briefing said these creatures were apex predators. They are, Tony said, watching Jake carefully. But being a predator doesn't mean you attack everything you see. Most predators are actually pretty careful about picking fights. Jake had reached the bear and was now standing just a few feet away from it. The massive creature lowered its head, and Jake reached out slowly to touch its nose. You're just a big teddy bear, aren't you? Jake said softly. The ice bear made a rumbling sound that might have been pleasure and gently bumped Jake with its massive head. Jake laughed and scratched behind the bear's ears. Jake has always been good with animals, Lisa explained to the stunned alien students. Dogs, cats, horses. Apparently ice bears too. Within an hour, Jake had not only befriended the ice bear, which he named Snowball, but had also attracted a pack of the so-called frost wolves. They looked like Arctic wolves, but with thicker fur and brighter blue eyes. Instead of hunting the humans, they seemed fascinated by these strange visitors. They're probably just curious, Jake said, as one of the wolves sniffed his hand. I bet they don't see many new species up here. Tony had finished building their shelter, a snow cave that would stay warm and dry even in the worst weather. Insulation is key, he explained to the watching alien students. Snow is actually a great insulator if you use it right. Lisa had identified several types of edible plants that grew even in this harsh environment, and had figured out how to catch fish through holes in the ice of a nearby frozen lake by the second day. The humans had established another thriving camp. Snowball, the ice bear, had become their unofficial mascot, following Jake around and helping to find food sources. The frost wolves had appointed themselves as camp guards, warning of incoming weather changes with their howls. The alien students were amazed, but also desperate. Their high-tech equipment was failing in the extreme cold. Their heating systems were draining power too quickly. Several were showing signs of altitude sickness. "Please," one of the crystal beings asked Lisa, "could you show us how to build one of those shelters?" "Of course," Lisa said. Snow cave construction is pretty straightforward once you know the basics. Soon, Lisa was teaching snow shelter building. Tony was giving lessons on high-altitude acclimatization, and Jake was running what could only be called a wilderness therapy session with local wildlife. "The key is to respect them," Jake explained, as Snowball demonstrated by gently taking a fish from his hand. "They're not monsters. They're just animals trying to survive, same as us." "But they could kill us so easily," said one of the gas beings. "So could a house cat, if it really wanted to," Jake replied. "But most animals don't want to fight unless they have to. Fighting is dangerous, even for predators. They'd rather save their energy for real threats." One of the frost wolves had taken a particular liking to Tony, following him around as he checked the weather and avalanche conditions. "This guy's got better weather sense than most meteorologists," Tony said, scratching the wolf's ears. "He always knows when a storm's coming hours before it hits." Professor Zianthara's daily check-in came through their communicators on the third day. "Status report," she said, and Jake was pretty sure he could hear her tentacles stress tapping. In the background, the alien students reported the usual problems: equipment failures, difficulty breathing, inability to find food or build adequate shelter. "And the humans?" Professor Zenthara asked with what sounded like resignation. "Great," Jake replied cheerfully. "Snowball found us a whole cave system with fresh water springs, and the wolf pack warned us about that avalanche yesterday before our instruments even detected it. Snowball, the ice bear, really friendly guy. He's been showing us all the best hunting spots." "The ice bear is helping you hunt?" "Well, more like he's teaching us what to hunt. Did you know there are these little Arctic rabbits that make their burrows under the snow?" Snowball showed us how to find them. There was a very long silence. "And the frost wolves are basically our weather service now," Tony added. "They know this mountain better than any satellite could." "Also," Lisa chimed in, "we've been sharing our techniques with the other students. Several of them have moved into our snow cave complex. It's much warmer than their individual shelters." Professor Zenthara made a sound that might have been a sigh or might have been a whimper. "Continue your activities." That evening, as they sat around their fire inside the warm snow cave, Jake looked around at their expanded group. Half the alien students had joined their camp, learning human cold weather survival techniques. Snowball was curled up near the entrance, serving as both guard and heater. The frost wolves were scattered around the cave system, keeping watch. "You know what's funny?" Jake said, feeding Snowball a piece of fish. "What?" Lisa asked, working on her notes about local plant life. "I think the professor expected us to be scared of all this stuff. The heat, the ocean, the desert, the mountains. But honestly, this is all just like camping back home." Tony nodded, checking the weather signs outside the cave entrance. "Maybe a little more extreme, but yeah. Basic survival principles are the same everywhere. Makes me wonder what Earth must look like to aliens," Lisa mused. Jake grinned. The final challenge world looked like the end of everything. Dark clouds filled the sky, lightning flashed constantly, and the ground shook from what sounded like explosions in the distance. Volcanoes dotted the horizon, spewing lava and ash. Into the poisonous-looking atmosphere, Professor Zenthara's voice came over the communicator, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely frightened. "Students, this is Challenge 5, the final test. Below you is Chaos Prime, a world undergoing complete ecological collapse. Jake looked out the transport window and whistled low. Now this looks interesting. The alien students were in various states of panic. Several were hyperventilating. Others had already activated their emergency beacons. One of the crystal beings was glowing so brightly it hurt to look at. The planet's surface experiences constant seismic activity, the professor continued. Volcanic eruptions, toxic gas emissions, acid rain, and electromagnetic storms that will disable most electronic equipment. EMP storms? Tony asked, checking his basic compass and mechanical watch. Good thing we learned to navigate the old-fashioned way. The atmosphere is barely breathable, Professor Xanthara went on. What plant and animal life remains is fighting for the last available resources. This is a world where civilization itself is collapsing. Lisa was studying the landscape below. Actually, it reminds me of some places back home after major natural disasters. Looks chaotic, but there's usually an underlying pattern if you know what to look for. The transport ship shook violently as they descended through the turbulent atmosphere. Through the windows, they could see the ground was cracked and broken, with steam vents and small lava flows scattered everywhere. You have no electronic equipment for this challenge, the professor announced. No communicators, no emergency beacons, no modern tools of any kind. You must survive for 2 weeks using only what you can make with your own hands. The ship landed hard on a relatively stable piece of ground, and the doors opened to reveal a world that looked like it was actively trying to kill everything on it. Most of the alien students took one look outside and immediately began arguing about who should activate their emergency evacuation first. Several were already showing signs of respiratory distress from the thin, acrid air. Jake stepped outside and took a cautious breath. Air's a bit thin and smoky, but it's not too bad. Like standing downwind of a campfire. Tony was scanning the horizon, reading the landscape. Seismic activity looks predictable. Those cracks in the ground follow clear patterns. And see those steam vents? That means geothermal activity. We can use that. Lisa was already examining the struggling plant life growing near the lava flows. These plants are adapted to extreme conditions. If they can grow here, there's probably something we can work with. Within hours, while the alien students were still debating evacuation procedures, the humans had established what could only be called a functioning settlement. Tony had found a geologically stable area in the lee of a rock formation that protected them from the worst of the ashfall. He had also figured out how to use the geothermal vents for heating and even cooking. Lisa had discovered that some of the hardy plants growing near the volcanic soil were not only edible, but actually quite nutritious. She had also found a way to collect clean water from steam condensation. Jake had made first contact with the local wildlife, which turned out to be a species of lizard-like creatures that had adapted to live near the lava flows. They were about the size of dogs, with thick, heat-resistant scales and intelligent eyes. "Meet Ember," Jake said, introducing the first lizard he had befriended. "He and his family have been living here for generations. They know exactly which areas are safe and which ones to avoid." The alien students stared in disbelief as Jake sat calmly next to a creature that looked like it belonged in nightmares, while Ember appeared to be enjoying having his scales scratched. "That thing could breathe fire," one of the insect beings sighed shakily. "He doesn't breathe fire," Jake laughed. "He just likes sitting near the warm rocks. Don't you, buddy?" Ember made a sound like a cat purring and leaned into Jake's hand. By the end of the first week, the humans had created what could only be described as a small civilization. They had figured out how to predict seismic activity by watching the behavior of Ember's lizard colony. They had established sustainable food and water sources. They had even built comfortable shelters using volcanic rock and plant fibers. More importantly, They had organized the surviving alien students into an efficient community. Lisa taught classes on disaster botany and emergency water purification. Tony ran seminars on geological hazard assessment and primitive construction techniques. Jake led group therapy sessions where alien students learned to overcome their fear of the local wildlife. The key to surviving disaster, Tony explained to a group of fascinated alien students, is not to fight the chaos. It's to find the patterns within it and work with them. Every ecosystem, even a collapsing one, has rules, Lisa added. Once you understand the rules, you can find your place in it. And remember, Jake said as Ember and several other lizards sunned themselves nearby, you're not alone. There are always others trying to survive too. Help them, and they'll help you. On the 10th day, something unexpected happened. Professor Zienthara arrived on the planet's surface in a heavily armored transport vehicle. She was wearing a full environmental suit and was accompanied by several drones for protection. She found the humans sitting around a geothermal vent they had converted into a communal cooking area, sharing a meal with most of their alien classmates. Jake was playing with a whole colony of the lizard creatures, who seemed to consider him part of their family. Ember was actually sitting in his lap like a scaly pet. Impossible, Professor Zenthara whispered, her voice barely audible through her suit's speaker. Oh, hey, Professor, Jake called out cheerfully. Want to join us for lunch? Lisa found these root vegetables that taste amazing when you cook them in the volcanic steam. Professor Zienthara approached slowly, her equipment registering dangerous levels of heat, toxic gases, and seismic activity. Yet here were her students, not just surviving, but apparently having a picnic in the middle of an environmental apocalypse. How? She asked simply. How what? Lisa responded, offering the professor a bowl of stew made from local plants. How are you alive? How are you comfortable? How are you thriving in conditions that would kill most of the species in the known galaxy? The three humans looked at each other and shrugged. It's not really that different from home, Tony said. Earth has volcanoes, earthquakes, storms, extreme weather. You just have to know how to deal with it. Earth also has dangerous animals, Jake added, scratching Ember behind his ear holes. But most of them are just trying to survive, same as everyone else. And plants and water and shelter materials, Lisa finished. You just have to know where to look and how to use what's available. Professor Zienthara activated her portable computer and pulled up the file she had been researching for weeks. Students, I need to show you something. The holographic display showed a planet that looked even more dangerous than the world they were currently on. Massive storms covered entire continents. Volcanic activity was visible from space. The oceans looked violent and chaotic. This is Earth, Professor Zenthara said quietly. Your home world. The alien students gasped. Several made sounds of horror. According to galactic classification standards, the professor continued, Earth is rated as a Class 12 death world, the most dangerous planetary classification we have. Gravity is more than double standard. Weather systems are violently unpredictable. The planet is covered with apex predators. 99% of known galactic species would die within hours of landing there. Jake looked at the hologram and nodded. Yeah, that's home all right. Looks like they took that picture during hurricane season. The Galactic Council has Earth listed in our databases as uninhabitable by intelligent life, Professor Zenthara said. We had no idea that not only did intelligent life exist there, but that it had developed space travel. Tony laughed. Well, when you grow up somewhere like that, everywhere else seems pretty easy by comparison. So, Lisa said with a smile, did we pass your survival course? Professor Zienthara looked around at the thriving community the humans had built in the middle of what was supposed to be an unsurvivable wasteland. She looked at the alien students who had learned not just to survive, but to work together under human guidance. She looked at Jake, who was now surrounded by a dozen of the supposedly deadly lizard creatures, all of them treating him like their favorite uncle. "Miss Parker, Mr. Morrison, Mr. Richards," she said phonally, "I don't think you are taking a survival course at all." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "I think," Professor Xanthara said slowly, "you were accidentally teaching one." She turned to address all the students. "Class dismissed. Permanently. I believe we need to completely redesign our curriculum." As they prepared to leave the Chaos World, Jake gave Ember one last scratch behind the ears. "Take care of yourself, buddy, and keep an eye on the new guys who might come here to learn." Ember purred and nuzzled Jake's hand, then rejoined his colony, which had grown larger and more organized during the human stay. "You know what's funny?" Jake said to his friends as they boarded the transport.